Hi, welcome back to Physics Can Be Fun History Edition. As you all know, I am your host, Yulia Mazanek, and today on our episode we will be joined by Miss Rosalind Franklin, who will be telling us about her discovery of DNA and double helixes using X-ray diffraction. So if you all can please help give a hand for Miss Rosalind Franklin. Hi, hello, hi, thank you. Yulia, thank you so much for having me on. I am so excited to be here and to be able to tell you and your lovely audience a little bit more about myself, my accomplishments, what led to the discovery of the double helix. And so just thank you so much for having me on. It's so nice to meet you. So, Miss Rosalind, start out by telling us your name and telling us a little bit about your project and what it entailed. As you so graciously introduced me, my name is Rosalind Franklin and I am a biophysicist. And so I am going to give you a little bit of an academic background before I get to my project, just so you can kind of see where I come from and how I got to this project of mine. So, in my undergraduate years at Newnham College at the University of Cambridge, I did study physical chemistry and I ultimately ended up getting my degree, and I ended up pursuing a doctorate's degree in physical chemistry as well at the University of Cambridge, which I received in 1945. And in those years of studying, in those years of research in the laboratory, I was able to gain this absolute fascination and just interest in this world of science, of physics, of biology, of chemistry, about how we work, how the world works, how we interact with each other, and how there is still so much to learn about everything in the scientific world. And so it truly became a passion of mine to be in the laboratory, to be working constantly, to be learning, to be exploring, analyzing, trying to make those pieces that we have fit better together so we can get the grand picture of things. And so after my schooling, I was given an amazing opportunity to work with Jacques Mering in the State Chemical Laboratory in Paris from the years of 1947 to 1950. Ultimately, this is where I learned about X-ray diffraction, and I hadn't started working with DNA quite yet, but I was introduced and taught essentially everything that I knew going into my DNA work about X-ray diffraction. And so for those of you who may not know, X-ray diffraction is essentially the use of X-rays, which are made up of electromagnetic energy in the form of photons, and we shoot these photons at a particular object, a particle, whatever it may be, and we essentially capture and measure the diffraction of these photons from this object. And so based on the different calculations of the angles, the lengths, the picture itself, we are able to conclude on the particle's physical composition, on its structure, chemical makeup, based on the atomic particles found inside of the particle and how far apart or close together they may be based on that atomic crystal structure found inside. And so during my 3 years in Paris with Jacques, I studied the structure of coal using X-ray diffraction. However, after those 3 years, I was given an opportunity, which is ultimately where this project begins, to come on as a research assistant at the Biophysical Laboratory at King's College under John Randall and his deputy Maurice Wilkins. And this was given to me in 1951, and I was very eager to accept, very eager to be given the opportunity for a multitude of reasons. But anyway, so this is ultimately where my DNA work truly began. So here at King's College, I was given the task to work on the structure and chemical makeup of DNA, because up to this point the only thing that was really known about DNA was that it had a phosphate background, that it had been found in every cell that had been investigated up to this point. However, we weren't sure that every single species contained this genetic material. We just knew that every cell that we had investigated did, and we also knew that it contained 4 base pairs: adenine, guanine, thymine, and cytosine. And so there was a lot to learn in the world of DNA. And obviously, as we know now, DNA is the foundation of every living thing. And so this was a very important discovery and area of research that needed to be done. And so I was very excited and a little bit proud, that I could be a part of such an important area of research at such an important time of science. And so essentially, during this project of mine, during my years in King's College, I was able to differentiate between two forms that are found of DNA. There's a crystalline or A form and a paracrystalline or B form of DNA. And so my work mainly focused on the crystalline or A form of DNA and figuring out its structure and trying to interpret and analyze it and what it meant for the overall DNA makeup itself. I worked on the A form while Maurice worked on the B form, just so that we could be kept apart, because fun fact, we did not get along very well, and Randall insisted that we work separately, thank goodness. So I spent most of my time focusing on the A form. And I did dab every now and then into the B form, but the A form kind of intrigued me a little bit more. It was more complex, harder to understand, and as we all know, I love a challenge. But ultimately, so I had concluded that one of these forms, at least, can be found in a helical form. However, I did not really know what that meant for the overall structure of DNA. Since there still wasn't enough known about DNA at the time, I did not have a lot to go off of, and I was not informed in a lot of areas of DNA, and so there were a few critical things that I did not know about DNA at the time, leading me not to be able to conclude by myself that DNA is in fact a form that consists of double helix. However, in 1952, during this project in my time in King's College, I did capture the famous photograph 51 of the B form, which is the foundation essentially that was laid for figuring out that DNA is in fact made up of a double helix. And so since I was focusing on the A form of DNA, I kind of put this photograph aside because, as I mentioned, I didn't have enough knowledge to kind of analyze this image, and since my focus and specialization was on the A form, I also didn't know too much about the B form, so I wasn't able to draw any conclusions from this image, so I put it aside. And I was also going to be transferred soon to a different college to work in a different laboratory, and so I was advised that my DNA work would be left behind. So I kind of put the B photograph aside and kept focusing on the A form of DNA. And so ultimately I was able to conclude that both forms do have a helical structure of sorts, but as I mentioned, I just didn't know that the biological functional form of DNA was the B form. I did not know which base pair is connected to which base pair, and I also didn't realize that these strands ran in opposite directions of each other. So these were critical points that I needed in order to come up with that conclusion by myself, and that's ultimately why I wasn't. However, in 1953, without my permission, my photograph of the DNA form B was given to James Watson and Francis Crick, who are also working on DNA and its structure. And a lot of people like to say that this photograph I wasn't able to understand and they were, and so just by looking at it they were able to conclude that DNA has a double helix. However, this is a common misinterpretation, since James Watson and Francis Crick also admit that they didn't use my photograph as like their evidence and then they concluded from it. They used it kind of more of a inspiration, a confirmation. So seeing my photograph, they were motivated and intrigued to keep studying the double helix theory of DNA, and ultimately after 6 weeks, using various models, various mathematical calculations to better assess and analyze the X-ray diffraction from DNA, they were able to conclude and confirm with my photograph 51 image that DNA is in fact consisted of a double helix. And so that's kind of the overview of the project. I did go on and study later on in a different college and things, but that's ultimately what kind of is important for this project for X-ray diffraction. Wow. So what were you guys trying to do or find? Was scrutinizing DNA and trying to look at specific details the ultimate goal, or is this something that was happenstance that you guys stumbled upon? Let me know what the initial goal was and if that was ultimately achieved or if that changed along the way. Yeah, so that's an excellent question. So I do want to make clear that this is not a project that was outlined in the sense that we sat down and were like, okay, on this day in 1953 we're going to take this picture and then this step and then this step and then this step, and we are going to find out exactly what the structure of DNA is. No, this is a project that took time, that happened gradually over years of studying, research, analysis in King's College Laboratory with lots of other different people involved, you know, mathematical aspects, physical aspects, chemical aspects. And so this project ultimately stemmed from my time in King's College along with Watson and Crick's time. Ultimately, what I was given the role to do is to study DNA and its structure, figure out the various, since we know those various structures of DNA, its chemical makeup, composition. And so I do believe that ultimately we found what we were trying to find. We were trying to find the composition and structure of DNA, and we ultimately did that successfully. But it wasn't something that happened quickly or as a matter of only one person or one experiment. It was something that took time, multiple people, multiple heads coming together, and multiple experiments and tools being used to analyze and ultimately conclude this. Now, where did this experiment occur? So as I mentioned briefly before, the experiment did occur in London at King's College. So now that we know a little bit about your project, your experiment, tell us what other significant events were happening around the world at this time. Was there anything that was maybe stressing you towards this project or influencing your curiosity in the subject matter? No, yeah, that is an absolutely excellent question. So some of the significant events that were going around during this time, as we all know, in 1947, World War II ended, and even though it ended in 1947, the effects and consequences of it were very long lasting in all different fields of the world, whether it was economical, scientific, you know, daily life. A lot of things had changed over time, and so we had gone through economic expenses, decreases, you know, cities had been destroyed, civilian life changed forever. Also, in the 1950s, we had the Korean War, and then we also had the Cold War going on between America and Soviet Russia, and so there was a lot of violence, a lot of stress, and so it wasn't a great time. It was very sad, very dark. You know, people are thinking, you know, is this the end of the world? Scientifically, though, before the 1950s, along with X-ray diffraction being used in DNA, just not correctly, we knew a little bit about DNA and we were very curious about it, very intrigued and motivated to find out more. We had found out that every cell that we had ever investigated contained DNA. What is this DNA that is seemingly a part of genetic chemical makeup in a lot of different species? We had figured out some of its structure, not enough to be able to tell what the overall structure of the DNA molecule itself was. And so there was a lot of, I wouldn't say stress, but there was a lot of motivation and influence in the science world to work on DNA, to figure out who would figure it out first, who would be able to solve the riddle of what DNA looked like, what it was composed of, how it worked in our bodies, how it worked in these cells. And so there was a lot of motivation in the scientific world to make those discoveries. That's kind of what was going on scientifically and also just kind of politically. Unfortunately, like I did mention, it was a very stressful, hard time for everybody, no matter what you were doing, whether you were fighting, whether you were at home, and it takes a toll on a lot of people and the economy, and so it was a tough time for sure. Now, who else was involved in this project with you, Miss Franklin? As I had mentioned, this was not a one-person job. This was not something that I was able to discover myself. I was able to conclude on my own work. This was a bringing together of multiple people, multiple roles, multiple tools, ways of thinking to be able to ultimately conclude and analyze that DNA does in fact have a double helix. And so the other people that were a part of this project were James Watson, Francis Crick, John Randall, and Maurice Wilkins. And so they all had various different jobs and roles when it came to the DNA work and the research of it. Now that we know about your project and who else was involved, what was your exclusive role? Let us know what part you played in this discovery and the making of this project. So, of course, as I had mentioned, I will just go over this briefly because I feel like I definitely mentioned this and answered this question earlier whenever I gave you a summary of the project. My role was ultimately to work with DNA, but specifically to try and figure out its structure using X-ray diffraction. And so my role in this discovery was that I was able to take the famous photograph 51 of the B or paracrystalline structure of DNA, which ultimately helped confirm Watson and Crick's theories and ideas that DNA is a double helix. And so I ultimately helped differentiate that DNA does have two forms, that it has an A or crystalline form and a paracrystalline or B form. My work on the separate forms of DNA of A and B are ultimately what kind of helped start the forming of the theory that, you know, DNA may be a double helical shape. And so, yeah, my work with X-ray diffraction definitely helped influence that as well, as I was very comfortable and very knowledgeable in the using of this tool in the scientific world. And so being able to capture such a clear image of of the form B of DNA definitely helped, as I said, to jumpstart that thinking towards the conclusion that was ultimately drawn. Now for the question that I'm sure we all want to know, what impact did this project, this discovery, have on the physics community, and kind of give us the effects that were seen after such a discovery was made? Yes, of course, that is an excellent question, a very important one too. I mean, obviously everyone wants to know, as soon as a discovery is made, what is this going to lead to? What are the next steps? What are the effects on the world of science, on the world around us? And so this was a huge foundational discovery in the sense that now that we know that DNA consists of a double helix, we were able to find out things like which bases paired with each other, the fact that the double helix is anti-parallel and runs in opposite directions, different bonding found within the DNA, and ultimately the greatest effect that this had is it helped Watson and Crick form the 3D structure of DNA. And so now we have a physical appearance for DNA. We know what it looks like, we know what it's made of, what it's composed of, how it works. And so now that we have this 3D structure, 3D model of DNA, we are able to figure out how this genetic makeup works inside of us, how it interacts with various parts of our bodies, how medicine works, how biology works within us. And so this led to a multitude of advances in biomedicine, in the medical world, in the molecular biology world, cellular biology world. I mean, with this foundation, we are able to ask so many more questions that we are now looking to be answered. Now that we have answered this major question, ultimately we are able to lay the foundation for genetic makeup, for life itself, what we are made of, how we interact with the natural world, how we interact inside of ourselves. The effects of this discovery are endless. I mean, to this day, we are still learning more about DNA and the various little parts of it. And so, yeah. Now that we have all the nitty-gritty and the hard facts, why don't we end with a little bit of a more fun question? So, Miss Franklin, what was your exclusive favorite part of this project and or discovery? What brought you the most happiness during this experience? Honestly, I think my favorite part of this project and just experience overall is the fact that I was able to make such a difference in the scientific community when it came to women in science. Even, you know, to this day, there aren't nearly as many women as there are men in scientific careers, in the scientific world. And so being able to break those stereotypes that women don't belong in science, women don't belong in the laboratory, it wasn't easy. I definitely had to struggle with things such as working on my own, not being included in all sorts of like sharing of ideas and information at various meetings or conventions like other men got to do. So everything that I did, I did by myself. So just being able to be a woman and to be a part of such an important discovery and to make such a huge difference in the physics community, just being able to do that as a woman and to show other women, other girls, the next generations that it is possible, that you can do this, and to be able to just be a motivator for other women, other girls to go into science, to pursue your dreams, to pursue your academic dreams. It is just such an honor to be used as a person that was able to change the course of history in that aspect. So I would say that was definitely my favorite Porteth project. Alright folks, there we have it, Miss Rosalind Franklin. If you guys can help me give her another round of applause. Thank you, Miss Franklin, so much for coming on. Thank you so much again for having me on your show. You are absolutely lovely, Miss Julia. Thank you again to the audience, to the people who watch. Now, don't forget to tune in next week for our next episode on Physics Can Be Fun, Geography Edition. This time we'll be traveling to various parts of Europe and exploring famous landmarks in the physics community. Thank you, and I'll see you next week.